Since video games were first released, developers have been striving year after year to achieve good graphics. This has especially been the case over the last 2 decades. Comparing games from back then to games now really show how far game developers have come. But this begs the question, if video game graphics have improved this much over the last 20 years, how much longer will it take for us to reach the pinnacle? For example, take a look at Witcher 3, beautiful game and absolutely holds up to modern standards. Now look at Hogwarts Legacy, another stunning game. The only difference is, The Witcher was released in 2015, and Hogwarts was released in 2023. Almost a 10-year difference. And Witcher 3 isn't the only game made 10 years ago that still proudly presents itself graphically. Dying Light, Black Ops 3, Until Dawn, just to name a few. But now let's compare games from 2015 to games that came out in the mid-2000s. Original MapleStory, Final Fantasy XII, Smash Bros. Brawl. I'm not saying that any of these games are bad. In fact, I like to argue that some of the best games to this day are released in the 2000s. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that graphically speaking, the difference from the 2000s to the 2010s was a lot more drastic from the 2010s to now. This brings me to my next point, and the whole point of the video. Game graphics nowadays are difficult to improve upon because we've come to a point where every game looks amazing, which is why the stylization of games have become so much more important than the graphics. The games that are timeless, played even decades after their release, incorporate their own unique style, which lets them escape the graphics master race and into a category of their own. The crazy part is, as long as the game has style, the graphics don't actually matter that much. The prime example of this is Undertale. I think you'll agree with me that Undertale's graphics comes nowhere close to games that were released around the same time. But regardless, this game became a worldwide masterpiece, and while this is mostly due to its story and the amount of depth and secret content the game has, you can't rule out the fact that Undertale was stylized in a different way to mainstream games. The sprite artwork breathes imagination, and this is paired very well with the large variety of ways you can play the game. I'm of course talking about the different routes you can take and the different options in combat. So even though Undertale doesn't have the same hyper-realistic modern art style as some of the AAA games, it still completely dumpsters them in terms of game quality, simply because other aspects of the game are better. Another timeless game, or rather, 2 games that have come recently, is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdoms. These games look fantastic, and this is largely due to the cel shading art style that the game decided to incorporate. This also matches the gameplay and the mood of the game, because these 2 games have never really focused on dark, serious themes. Rather, it carries itself with a playful and lighthearted tune, whether it's through these goofy little Korok seeds, or this guy that eats gems because he wants to become a frog. The music isn't in your face, but gentle and almost reminds you to take your time and enjoy the peaceful surroundings. So it makes sense not to go for a Dark Souls kind of style, because the atmospheres are completely different. And finally, I gotta mention my favorite franchise, Persona. The amount of soul put into stylizing these games is insane, from the art, to the UI, to the music. Seriously, these guys put in work. Each entry in the franchise focuses on a new idea and motif, so it's not surprising that the stylization for each game is different. In Persona 3, your combat UI is a revolver chamber, a very clever reference to the evokers that the characters have to use in order to summon their persona. When you climb to the TV in 4, the game puts an old school television effect on. And in 5, do you really have to ask? It's everything. There are a lot of other games too, like Minecraft, Hollow Knight, Terraria, Portal, that don't have the next gen graphics that will blow your mind, but it's good enough. And what it does have in place of graphics more than makes up for it. You can't tell me that the reason you played Minecraft was because of the graphics. No one does. It's because the feeling of enjoyment as you progress along the game, going into the Nether for the first time, killing the Ender Dragon, building crazy scale projects with your friends. These create moments that never fade, and it's what the game builds upon in its future updates. But having said all of this, I can't fault you for not wanting to play a game just because of its graphics. Honestly speaking, even as I preach the fact that graphics don't matter, and they don't, I have to admit that some games are wildly more unappealing because of how they look. I'd be lying if I said I've never decided to not play a game due to its graphics. An example of this, and don't kill me, is Ocarina of Time. I'm sure that it's a great game, and there's a reason that it's won so many awards and been so highly acclaimed, but I just haven't been able to bring myself to play it. Partly because the game wasn't released around my time, but also because compared to the Zelda games that I grew up with, which was mainly Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, the game felt old and clunky. So the point I'm making is that to an extent, graphics do matter, but that extension doesn't go very far. Timeless games are always unique, because they bring something new to the table in terms of video games. That's why older games like Earthbound, Paper Mario, Final Fantasy VII still stay highly commended after all these years. Whether it's through the story, gameplay, or soundtrack, a game has never been glorified simply because of graphics alone. And that's why style trumps graphics, and graphics don't really matter that much.